Welcome, everyone, to our brand new podcast called Getting Deep with a PhD and a JD.
Hey, Nicki.
Hey, Kimmie. Guess what? I have a question for you.
Do you really now?
I do. Okay, so what do the following books have in common? Charlotte's Web, Harry Potter, The Handmaid's Tale, Beloved, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and The Kite Runner.
Surprisingly, when you recite that list, those are books that have been banned by school libraries.
Absolutely. So today we are going to talk about banned books and books that folks have said these aren't appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is really relevant because it's the number of books that have been singled out to be banned, the number of books has just increased so much.
Yes.
And also it's not just books, but also in addition to things in the library, we like films and tapes and just a lot of other things and CDs. But today we're talking specifically about book banning.
Yeah. And it's not just in public schools, but also in public libraries, which that surprised me as well. It's like,
Absolutely.
Hey, I am I'm a grown adult. I should be able to go to a library and get whatever book I want to read.
Exactly. And I was very surprised, Kimmie, because when I looked up information for this episode, one of the pages that I looked at was the American Library Association. And so they have a lot of resources there about book banning and lots of articles and lots of things. And the question was, where is the attempted censorship? And they had almost half split between school districts and public libraries.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as you were saying about, being a grown woman and
Yeah.
having someone make the determination that this material is not appropriate for you, when you can clearly make the choice as to whether you're going to read it or not.
And it just flies in the face of what a democracy it really is all about. It's
Absolutely.
all about access to information and being able to speak your mind and live your life, basically.
Absolutely.
And banning books and what's more telling as well is that some of the topics that are common to book banning include history.
Right.
And that stood out to me. Of course, it's also a substantial number of books that are banned are African American or minority groups, indigenous groups, of course. The usual suspects, right?
Yeah.
Minority groups and LGBTQ plus groups. The books that are about those topics are written by those authors.
Mm-hmm.
Tend to be subject more to a book ban than others.
Absolutely.
But history, that's very telling, and because if we don't know and learn our history, we are doomed to repeat it, and so that's a very dangerous thing to do.
And when we think about what sustains our democracy, education, critical thinking, getting new ideas, and even getting old ideas and being able to see them with a new perspective. These things are all important. And when we talk about banning books, we're really talking about stopping the discourse. We're talking about stopping whether it's children or whether it's adults. We're talking about stopping them from engaging in discourse. And how do we learn? We learn by having these discussions, by really opening our minds and really thinking about things from different perspectives. And when we're not allowed to even look at the information, then we're not even allowed to challenge it or critically think about it.
Mm-hmm. And
And a
it
lot of these,
suppresses diversity.
absolutely, and it's suppressing diversity because a lot of these books are uh, first person accounts, or sometimes they're fictional accounts, but they're accounts of how people live. And in the first person accounts, they're really providing information from that author's point of view. And so many of, like you mentioned in the beginning, many of these are from people who are people of color, members of the LGBTQIA plus or queer community. So it's really silencing people. It's really
Mhm.
taking their voices and saying these voices aren't appropriate.
Right.
And I was
Mhm.
shocked to see I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, because that was one of the first books that I read that really moved me and really impacted me, like just learning to read, and reading about Maya Angelou's life. And yes, she was sexually assaulted.
Right.
And that was important. That was an important part of that book. And so I'll never forget when I read that, I just had this understanding that what she experienced wasn't right. And
Mhm.
that helped me to understand, when people are saying, if somebody touches you or if somebody does something, tell someone. That made me feel like it was okay for me to disclose, because Maya Angelou, who I really just loved her writing and her poetry, really helped me to see, to normalize telling
Mhm.
instead
Yes.
of making it a secret.
Yeah. And making you feel ashamed, because what we also, some of the articles that I read talked about, the whole, point of education, and primary education, secondary, is that, school children need to, books represent they have to represent both a mirror and a window.
Oh, I like that.
So the mirror is, you have to have literature, um, you know, authors that look like and have experiences similar to children that are in school, so that they
Hmm.
feel seen. They feel
Representation matters.
representation matters. And then you have the window, so that you can see others and recognize that everyone isn't the same as you, and it's okay. So that's sort of the window part. So having the diversity of authors, the diversity of content, is important to a child's development and learning. All, of course, at appropriate ages. The content certainly has to be appropriate for the age level,
Right.
but it shouldn't be this idea that a particular facet of society should be suppressed and not represented at all.
Exactly.
Because you have a lot of children who are part of that, a part of that group of people, no
Yeah.
matter how you slice it. So it's just, it's just really disgusting to me.
It is so disheartening as a person who is in an educational, or any
Yes.
educational sphere. It's very disappointing when I turn on the TV and I hear that folks want to protect children by censoring material. And people will say, and this is the other thing, people will say that libraries are grooming children. And it just makes me feel so angry, because
Mhm.
libraries are really, for a lot of children, libraries are places where you can really escape into fantasy and
Did
really
you just say fantasy?
explore. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
really explore the world. And also they can go to libraries and they can have access to all of these books, all of these incredible gems and these stories. And libraries offer a lot of other services and programs for children. And so if you are saying that this is a place that is grooming, that is not safe for children, then you are really doing your children a disservice. Um, the other thing is that librarians are being attacked and threatened.
Yeah.
And yeah, in reading about book banning, reading about these specific groups that are forming, and they're putting out the false narrative that, like I mentioned, that libraries are grooming, and that librarians, they just want to push all this pornography and all this horrible thing, all this horrible work they want to push to your children. And so what's happening is librarians are being threatened.
Wow.
Libraries are being defunded. I was reading about, I'm trying to think of where it was. I believe it was in Virginia. And it was a library. And they said, if you don't take out these books, we're going to reduce your funding. And they actually
Oh,
reduced the
yeah, I did.
funding by 75%. I'm trying to remember exactly where that was. I thought it was in Virginia. It may have been someplace else. But the whole point is that people who are not educators, people who are being um, influenced by politicians, instead of really getting their information from educators and from people who are really
Exactly.
in the trenches working with children, they are out there spreading this narrative that librarians and that these books are really harming children.
You know what's interesting to me? The fact that you bring that up, it seems to me, and I don't know if this was always the case, right? Maybe I'm just at an age now where I'm paying attention to these kinds of things more closely. But I feel like, as a society, we're putting too much um, stock or reliance on politicians,
Yes,
and they don't. We're relying on politicians to talk to us about climate. They don't know anything about it.
right, right,
um, about these book bans. They aren't educated in literature, in education, and how children learn, how people learn. They don't know. They don't know what they're talking about.
right,
Essentially, is what I'm saying. But we are relying on them as if they were the experts in all of these different facets of what they're doing. It's become more dictator as opposed to representative. Like, you're supposed to represent the interest of your constituents.
right,
That
right.
doesn't mean that you are the knower of all things. And I feel like there are lots of
Exactly.
politicians who are acting in this space of, I am the knower of all things, and they're really not. And it's like, it's definitely having a detrimental effect on our society in general, where it's gone.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that we lose when we say, okay, the politicians have all the power and they can make the determination about what we read and what we watch, even what kind of health care we get. When we do
Yes.
that, what we're doing is we're really allowing people who don't, like you said, don't have the skills to make these decisions. And the way they're making these decisions, they're making these decisions so that they can get reelected.
Hmm.
I think about some place like Florida. And I think about Florida has one of the when you look at book banning and censorship, Florida's really high up there.
Yeah.
And when I think about what's happening in Florida, it's a trickle down effect. So it's about book banning, but then it's also about other types of information. And then now they're looking at the colleges there, and they're saying, we don't, as politicians, we don't like this. We don't like diversity, equity, and inclusion. So therefore, if you're doing this, we want to be able to limit your funding. And
Hmm.
so so they have the purse strings, and they want to be able to say, okay, we don't like this or we don't like this.
Yeah.
And it when a population is not able to read and get information and to critically analyze and think about information, that's when you have a population that just follows along with
That
people
just follows along. And
because they can't think about it.
it reminds me of an episode of one of my favorite sitcoms that I like to watch, The Golden Girls.
Oh, you know what?
And
My colleagues like that show as well.
oh my gosh. And so one of the main characters, Stan, which is Dorothy's ex-husband, he has a sister. And his sister is like, somehow she's like from Russia, right? So she comes to visit, and ends up having to stay at the house with Dorothy and Sophia and Rose and Blanche, right? And so at one of the scenes, they have this discourse about access to information. And so Blanche's sister wrote a book, and so they went to the bookstore for her book signing, and the sister came with them, and she was like, "It's so confusing, all of these books and information. How do you know what to do? What are you supposed to do? And what are you supposed to think?" And Dorothy was like, "That's the point. You shouldn't be told what to think. You should have access to this information
Right.
so that you can decide for yourself what works, what's for you, how your mind works, etc." So I just thought it was interesting. And this conversation really brought that up, and how
Mm-hmm.
important it is to have that discussion and to have information,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to
For
have that,
democracy.
and to have information that's age appropriate, but starting at a young age so that you learn how to engage in a discourse. Like right now, when we look on the internet and we look at discussion boards and we look at comments that people make, I mean, it is just the worst of humanity because people
Yeah.
don't know how to engage each other. They don't know how to have a civil conversation and disagree while still respecting the other person's humanity.
They
Okay.
also don't know how to research
Yes.
accurate information. It's like you have, that's why we have this information available. I guess it's kind of two sides to a coin, right? We do have access, and a lot of people, when you look at comment sections, I think people espouse views that are totally rooted in inaccuracy and misrepresentation or misinformation. It's rooted in that because they are sort of relying on information that's just sort of floating out there,
Yeah,
as opposed to researching viable sources before espousing whatever opinion they have. So I don't know. It's almost kind of
exactly.
like, two sides of the coin though, so
Yeah.
in some ways, we have this idea of book banning, but we also have the internet though.
Yes,
And so so the information is still
is
there,
there. Right.
you know.
But
Mhm.
anyone can put up any information.
Yeah.
And what's happening now is that people don't know how to discern
Yes.
the information.
Yes.
Yes, I just read an article about children not being able to tell fake news from real news. And I hate saying
Mhm.
fake news because
I
that's what,
know.
that's the
That's a
false news,
buzzword
news
too.
that is false from
Hmm.
news that is true. And the way you do that is you start asking questions.
Yes.
And the thing that really helps you to start asking questions is when you're reading and you
Yes.
have access to information that you haven't seen before and you're starting to ask questions like, what does this mean? I remember reading, do you remember reading and you'd run into a word that you didn't know and you'd say, what does this mean? And what would they say? Get the
Go
dictionary.
check your dictionary. Yeah.
Go get the dictionary. And we were made to look up the
Look
word,
it up. Yeah. Hmm.
and it showed you how you pronounce it. It showed,
Hmm.
examples of how you used it.
Yeah.
And I always say, oh, why can't somebody just tell me what it means? But I am so happy. That was a skill that I learned. And
Mhm.
I'm so happy that I had parents and teachers that really said, get the dictionary, look it up. They didn't
Mhm.
just give me the information because they wanted me to develop the skills to find the information
And the
myself.
critical thinking.
And the critical thinking,
Yeah.
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 That's so funny you said that, because my dad was so famous for saying that. And I would ask him questions all the time. He'd be like, go look it up. Go check the dictionary. Like, okay, Dad. But yeah,
I
it
know.
definitely a valuable skill. And so one thing that I do want to say too about the book banning, one of the articles or reports that I read talks about book banning is taking place, of course, across the country, but most of the bans between July and December of 2022, they were concentrated in 5
Mm-hmm.
states. Guess which one is one of them?
Florida, Florida. Yes,
Florida,
Florida.
Missouri,
Missouri,
South Carolina, Texas,
Texas, of course.
and Utah.
Utah.
Those are the
Yeah.
five that the article that I read
I
talked about. I thought that
so
was interesting.
being in Virginia, I was really interested in Virginia, and it's interesting because the American Library Association, one of the first, they have examples of book banning, and one of the
Yeah.
first book banning example they have is from Front Royal, Virginia, the
Oh, I think I saw.
Samuels Public Library, um, and they had a Clean Up Samuels event where they had two book banning barbecue events. They will be beer and babysitting. And this is really interesting to me because I would think that people who are so afraid of children being these impressionable little minds would be really nervous about having grown adults consuming alcohol around children,
And
you know,
fire.
and fire. I was just very, beer and babysitting to fill out requests for materials that should be banned from the library. And so they had over 500 forms completed for 150 unique titles. And most of these titles are from the LGBTQIA plus
Hmm.
community. Um, and there's like there are different, like when we talk about books from the LGBTQIA community, some of these things we're talking about are books where they have like animals or cartoons or things that that aren't explicit. But what they're doing is they may have a penguin that has like two male penguins may adopt a child, or
Hmm.
they,
Hmm.
but they're not, it's not explicitly it's not a sexual or sexualized book.
Yeah.
But I think what
Hmm.
people are afraid of is they're afraid of different family systems becoming normalized, which is
Hmm.
what we have anyway. We have
Hmm.
these different family systems are not going anywhere.
It's not going
And
anywhere.
so the more people try, and this is the irony, the more people try to ban books, what do kids do? They rebel.
Oh, they
So in
rebel.
places, and this is something that they mention, in the places where people are trying to rebel, you see kids wanting to read these books or saying, well, why are they banned? And yes, I want to see these books.
Hmm.
It's like the forbidden fruit. So
And
it
they're
has, yeah,
hmm
absolutely.
because the internet, you can't. You're just not. You're not going to um restrict access to this information.
Right. And if there's so many things, like the reason for the banning, people, we don't want we don't want our children to be over sexualized. We don't want our children um to see inappropriate relationships. We don't want our children to do all of this. But yet and still, it's in society. And
And
so if you are a parent, you have to teach your child how to navigate in a world where they're going to see all of the stimulus.
and then if they identify, the last thing that you want is for your child to feel unworthy, invaluable, and suicide rates increasing,
Absolutely.
depression increasing, because that's what's going to happen. And
Yeah.
and it's just, I just don't understand how and why people refuse to see that, refuse to accept it, because it's been. I mean, it's been happening. There are people who are LGBTQ from the beginning of
We
time.
have always we have
Yeah,
always had LGBTQIA folks in the community.
yeah.
We've always had trans folks in the community. We have always. And I even say to people, if you don't know someone who is a member of the LGBTQIA plus community or who identifies as queer,
Mhm.
then you probably are a person that people don't trust to disclose to, because the
Mhm.
number of people out there is
Mhm.
just it's just you know just a lot of people are out, and people are
Yeah.
proud. If and so that's why I'm saying, if families are trying to protect their kids, then, there are lots of things. I can turn on the TV right now, network TV, and find things that are objectionable,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yeah, for
And
a variety
so,
of different reasons.
right. And the other thing is, um,
Violence.
right, a lot of violence. And the other thing is, I don't know if parents realize that you could have a child who identifies as a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, or
Mhm.
you could have a child who identifies as trans. And if that happens, and that child has been told that they're horrible and they're terrible, and you haven't allowed them to see any material that shows them being in, just like shows people that are
A
like them
positive light.
being
And
in
a
a positive
positive
light,
light. Yeah.
then, just like you mentioned, the suicide rate and depression and anxiety and people not feeling worthy. And I mean, it just breaks my heart when I hear about parents disowning their children. I mean,
Yes.
it just it
I couldn't imagine.
I just cannot imagine it. I cannot
Yeah.
imagine it. I just can't imagine it. I
Yeah.
mean, there are hardcore people out there who have committed atrocious crimes, right? And let's get this straight. I'm not saying that being a member of the LGBTQIA community is a crime. That's not what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. No.
What
Yeah.
I'm trying to say is that there are people done some really, really bad things, and you will still see the mama sitting in court saying, "Don't hurt my baby." You
Yeah.
know, you
Mm-hmm.
still see
Mm-hmm.
that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's because the mother has unconditional love for their child, or the
Mm-hmm.
father has unconditional love. You'll see fathers there too doing that.
Yeah. The children aren't disowned in those situations,
Exactly.
but they are if they love who they love. I mean,
Exactly.
it's really amazing to me.
It, it
Um,
it's just unbelievable to me. It's
yeah.
unbelievable to me.
So I think this is a good segue. Time flies when we're having a spirited discussion, Nikki.
I
But we got to
know.
get to our call to actions. So, what can our viewers and listeners do? What kinds of action can they take if book banning, is of a special importance to them, and what action they can take?
So I keep talking about the American Library Association because they have a wealth of resources. So they actually have a page that tells you all about ways that you can get involved. And so the first thing would be donating to them, of course. But then they talk about, okay, how can you support library personnel and libraries? How can you get involved politically? So because librarians are being threatened. So how can you help to combat that? By writing op-eds, by contacting your legislators, by really voting and thinking about what do your candidates stand for, by patronizing your library, going to your library, going to events, showing folks that the library is a valuable place, and being invested in your community. Uh, you
Especially your
know,
school boards,
especially your school boards,
going to those meetings.
Yeah, going to those meetings, because politics, when we think about the political environment, it's not just voting for president. What's that quote? All politics is local. I think that's the quote.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's all politics is local, which really doesn't sound correct from a grammatical sense, but that's the quote. So, really thinking about, because that's where people have the opportunity to really impact what happens to you and your children and your families.
Day to day.
This would be
Mm-hmm.
in like things like school board
Mm-hmm.
votes,
Yeah.
and for places that don't have um for places that have appointed school boards, to really fight for the right to vote in your school board. Because when you have appointed school boards, then the person who wins the election could pretty much fill the school
Yeah.
board with people that support their view, and it really limits the
Diversity.
population's diversity and
Mm-hmm.
ability to get other perspectives heard.
Exactly. So I just kind of want to impart two things. One is, researching this. There's a plethora of avenues. If you do a Google search on, how to support or not support, but combat, book banning, there are lots of organizations, lots of resources out there. Use your discernment in choosing, how and with whom you want to participate in combating book banning. So there's a lot of information out there. Then the second thing is I found one organization called Every Library Institute. I haven't researched them in depth, but it's something that popped up, and it looks like they have different videos that you can watch, giving you steps. For example, Every Library Institute has this one where it's called 7 Steps to Fight Against Book Bans, for example. And they have webinars that you can listen to and watch. Other research articles that, they have a sort of a research bank of information to get you educated on how to become involved in combating, book banning. So I would say that. So
Yeah.
So what are some good things that are going on?
Ooh, tell me something good. Yeah. Are we going to do it today?
Yeah.
Are we going to do it today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Until we get it.
Okay. Ready?
What I don't understand is why we can't start the song at the same time. Why are we always off?
I think it must be the distance. But then, okay.
I'm gonna count it down. I'm gonna count.
Okay.
What, and then we're gonna start singing.
Okay.
On 1, 3,
okay.
2, 1.
Tell me something good. But you know what? It probably is because the disparity between the differential between seeing it and hearing it, because the sound and light. Yeah, so that's
so funny.
It's funny. But it's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
So what is the good? Go ahead.
Oh, I think the good thing is that people are really starting to wake up and realize that book banning is occurring and it's harmful. I think that we've always had book banning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people have said, oh, okay, people are trying to ban that. But now it is happening in a way that we have not really seen in my lifetime, we haven't seen, where people are just saying, oh, there's this one word and we're just going to ban the whole book.
The whole thing, yeah.
And
exactly.
So
like a
people are really starting to say, to see that. LeVar Burton, Reading Rainbow, love, and Geordie LaForge from Star Trek, love myself some LeVar Burton. He even called out, or some people will say called in, I think it's Moms for Liberty, the group that is really trying to spearhead a lot of the book banning.
Okay.
And he said he was very angry about it because, he really stands for people reading and giving children books and just the wonder and the magic of reading. And so people are really starting to stand up. I know that Pink, the artist, had she purchased a bunch of books for Florida to give away, packages of banned books to give away. Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was great.
Very cool.
And so, and also the fact that people are saying, okay, we're going to ban these books, it just has made people more interested. Like, I went on the banned book list, and my goal is to, read as many banned books as possible.
Yeah.
And so I just finished reading Not All Boys Are Blue. All Boys Aren't Blue. That's what it is.
Okay.
And the reason I read it was because it was publicized in a banned book list based on some book banning that was occurring in Florida. And so I picked it up. I said, okay, I'm going to go buy this book and I'm going to read it. And so so the good thing is that people are starting to wake up and hear and realize that book banning is occurring.
Yeah. And I think the good is that we still have a variety of different information sources, namely Beyonce's internet. Al Gore's internet. So we have, resources available on the internet. It's not just singular where you can get your information and we have to rely on that. It's unfortunate, but at least we do have those channels
Right.
to access the information that we want to access. So I think that's a good thing. And I would just second your sentiment in that more and more people are becoming cognizant of book banning. People who have resources are doing their part in combating the book banning. So that I think those are all good things. And then I think the fact that there was so much out there that you can so far as resources that you can use to assist in combating it, like I just was saying in our last segment, that's a good thing as well. So,
Hmm.
you know,
Absolutely.
I'm cautiously optimistic.
I'm cautiously optimistic as well. And I have some caution because I just see it's like every day someone is stepping up saying, "Oh, here's something else that needs to be banned. Here's something else." And the reasoning, and it's not just about schools, but it's also about public libraries. So
Yeah.
even if people say, "Okay, well, if you don't have it in the school, at least we can have it in the public library so folks who want to get it there can get it." But so I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah.
Cautiously optimistic. I want to end this segment by kind of telling you about some of my favorite banned books.
Okay.
Um, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret
Oh,
was
yeah.
one of my favorite books. If for those of you who haven't read it, it's about Margaret and growing up and getting her first period, and you know, just just growing up, and that really helped me a lot because experiencing having somebody going through the challenges of, oh, am I going to be the last one to develop, and
Mhm.
am I always going to be like this? It was so great reading Judy Blume. And I think I've read every Judy Blume book.
Oh, really?
And a lot of them have been banned, like Forever,
Wow.
Tiger's Eye, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Those are the three ones I think that have been banned for sexually explicit content.
That's so wild. Gosh. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
And I read these when I was young. I was
Yeah.
like young, middle school,
But when you think
and
about it, your parents weren't very comfortable with having discussions with you. And and as a child, you're almost kind of left to fend for yourself with these, with occurrences that are natural, that are supposed to occur. And there's nothing wrong with talking about them because
right,
it's a part of nature. And we should be able to learn about these things so that we are not ashamed. We're not, and that shame leads to lack of knowledge, and you end up behaving in a way that's detrimental to your well-being and not being able to
absolutely.
take care of yourself if you don't know what it is. It leads to all of that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Okay.
yeah, it absolutely leads to all
Hmm.
of that, leads to shame and
Hmm.
doubt. And um, so I wanted to mention that because there's so many books on the banned books list that were so influential to me in my development. And I just feel so sad that children aren't going to be able to have just the wonderful books that I had growing up. And I really think that having access really impacted me and helped me to be the person that I am today.
Yeah.
And I also will say, I had parents who were kind of like, "Oh, you want to read that? Oh, okay." You know,
Hmm. Hmm.
they really didn't say too much about what I was reading.
Hmm.
They knew what I was reading. They were
Yeah.
invested in me. They were really engaged in my life. Uh, but they didn't really try to censor me. In fact, um, I remember one time I went to one of my mom's doctor's appointments and with one of her GYN visits, and I must have been about 3 or 4 years old. And I picked up one of the pamphlets and started looking in and sounding out the words.
Hmm.
And one of the nurses went to my mom and said, "Oh, look at her. She has that." And my mom said, "I know. I'm so proud of her to be able to read at that age." And so,
I can
so I
hear her
think it,
saying it too.
yeah,
Hmm.
I think it just shows how my mom, she didn't. she didn't hide those things. She wanted me to read, and other people may have thought that I read things that were too, quote, grown
Mm-hmm.
for me, but my
Mm-hmm.
mother always helped me to put things into context. And
And
so
that's
that was,
important. You know,
yeah,
parents need to be more, definitely need to be involved in what their children are reading. And to also check what's, on the, banned books list, and review them for yourself. And
yeah,
and if you feel like it's important for your child to have access, give them access.
right. But don't stop everybody else's child and
Yeah.
everybody else's and everybody else from having access to that. If you make the decision as a parent that that's what you want, that's fine. But don't make it for everybody, because everybody's parents can sit down, um, or their caretakers, caregivers can sit down with them and make the decision
Mm-hmm.
as to what they want.
Yep.
So, Kimmie, we have just gone
Yeah.
over our time
We
once
have. Yeah.
again. We are just rolling with it. We like to we love it. We love it.
Mhm. So, folks, hopefully you enjoyed this topic as well. Make sure you like and subscribe real quick before we end, and let us know any other topics as well.
Yes, definitely like and subscribe, and have a fabulous, fabulous rest of the day.
All right. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.